My father didn't even look at me when he ordered me to sign away $9.8 million. He just slid a pen across the mahogany table like he was discarding a piece of trash. "Sign it, Elena," he said, his voice flat and bored. "You've always been a liability. This money needs to be in hands that actually know how to lead." Behind him, my sister Nina was already scrolling through luxury real estate on her phone, a pitying smile tugging at her lips. They thought they had me. They thought that because I was the difficult daughter, I'd just fold under the weight of my father's shadow. But they forgot one thing. I'm an Air Force pilot. I've stared at master caution alarms while screaming through the sound barrier. I don't react to noise, I analyze systems. I picked up the pen. It was cold, perfectly balanced, the kind of weight that could ruin a life with one stroke. I let it hover over the signature line. I let the silence in the room stretch until Nina stopped scrolling and my father's ice stopped clinking in his scotch glass. Then, I set the pen down with a sharp, deliberate click. I didn't look at my father. I looked at the family lawyer, a man who looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin. "Mr. Halvorsen," I said, my voice the same low, steady frequency I use for a combat check-in. "Before I sign anything, I have one question about the faithful steward clause." The air in the room didn't just get cold. It froze. Because for the first time in 30 years, my father realized he wasn't the one in command. In my family, I wasn't the favorite. I wasn't even the second favorite. I was the difficult daughter, the one people whispered about at parties like I was a storm system on the horizon. From the outside, my family looked like a clean success story: money, property, a last name that opened doors. Inside, it was a machine built on one rule: agree with my father, or get treated like you're defective. When I was a kid, Nina learned how to perform femininity like a language. She learned which fork to use, how to laugh without taking up space, how to make men feel smarter by asking questions she already knew the answers to. My father adored her for it. He called her graceful, mature, a natural leader. When I tried to mimic that, it felt like wearing someone else's skin. I didn't want the dresses or the debutante balls. I didn't want to be displayed like proof that my father's legacy was producing the right kind of women. I wanted the sky. I wanted the cockpit. The discipline. The clean rules. The reality that didn't care about your last name. My father acted like my career was a phase, like flying military aircraft was the same as dyeing your hair in college. He called it a distraction from your real duties, and he said it softly, smiling like he was doing me a favor. My real duties. That phrase was a cage. To him, Nina was the daughter who understood the assignment: marry well, smile well, stay close, keep the family image polished. And I was the daughter who refused to be managed. Nina called me a glorified bus driver more than once, usually with a laugh that made it sound like a joke, until you realized she never joked like that about anyone else. My father called me impulsive, unstable, too emotional. He loved those words. They gave him cover. They made other people nod sympathetically at him, like raising me was a burden he carried heroically. He used my discipline against me, too, twisted it into a story where my calm meant something was wrong with me. He once told our neighbors I didn't go to my cousin's wedding because I was unstable. He said it casually, like he was explaining a weather forecast. A common word used to dismiss women with spines. The truth? I was flying a transport mission in a storm because the stable pilots had stayed grounded. I was the one they called when the job didn't come with applause, only risk. I remember sitting in the cockpit that night, watching rain smear the glass, feeling the aircraft shudder in turbulence, and thinking about how my father was probably somewhere warm and clean, telling people I was unpredictable. He didn't say, "She's on duty." He didn't say, "She's serving." He said, "She's unstable." And Nina never corrected him. Because the myth benefited her. In our family, there was only room for one kind of successful woman. The kind who stayed. The kind who played the game. The kind who never made men uncomfortable by being competent without permission. I didn't leave the family for attention. I left because I could feel myself suffocating inside their expectations. And when my grandfather chose me, the difficult one, the daughter who didn't fit, my father didn't hear it as love. He heard it as rebellion. A threat. A stain on his legacy. So he decided to correct it. Not with conversation. With coercion dressed up as family responsibility. Here's what they didn't know or didn't care to know. I wasn't close to my grandfather because I wanted his money. I was close to him because he was the only person in my family who spoke to me like my independence wasn't a character flaw. 6 months before he died, his caregiver called me late at night. Your grandfather asked for you, she said. He's not doing well. Not my father. Not Nina. Not Grant. Me. I drove out after duty, still smelling faintly of jet fuel and cold metal. The kind of smell that gets into your hair and your clothes and reminds you that you're part of a machine bigger than your ego. When I walked in, my grandfather was in his chair by the window, a blanket over his legs. A book sat open on his lap, but his eyes weren't on the pages. He was listening to the house like it might speak. He looked smaller, but his eyes were still sharp, still his. He smiled when he saw me, and it wasn't polite. It was relief. About time, he rasped. I sat with him. I brought groceries. I fixed the gate motor that kept sticking. I checked smoke detectors. I listened when his voice got tired and stopped talking when he needed quiet. Sometimes he told me stories from when he was young, how he built the family fortune from risk and stubbornness and decisions that kept him awake at night. Sometimes he stared at family photos on the mantel like they were evidence. One night, after my father left early from a rare visit, my grandfather stared at the closed door for a long time and said, "They're hungry." He didn't mean food. He meant more. I didn't respond right away. Silence is an honest tool. It makes people either face themselves or run. I gave them everything, he said finally. And they turned it into entitlement. Then he looked at me. You don't need my money, he said. I'm not here for it, I answered. I know, he said. That's why I'm leaving it to you. That was the first time I felt the weight of what he was planning. Not because I suddenly wanted luxury. Because I understood what that kind of money does to people like my father. It doesn't corrupt them. It gives them permission. That night, after my grandfather fell asleep, I sat at his kitchen table with a binder thick enough to bruise your ribs if you dropped it. For 100 pages. I read it like a flight manual, slow, precise, no skipping. Because I've learned the hard way. The thing that saves your life is usually written in small print. And buried inside was a section that made my skin go cold. Faithful steward. I read it twice. Then again. My eyes weren't skimming. They were locking onto phrases like targets. Coercion. Duress. Disqualification. Immediate forfeiture. It wasn't just a clause. It was a trap. A failsafe. A poison pill for anyone who tried to bully the beneficiary into surrender. I sat back in the chair, the kitchen quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and I realized my grandfather knew exactly who he was dealing with. He wasn't leaving me money. He was leaving me a boundary with teeth. Back in my father's study, the air felt tighter, like pressure building behind a sealed door. My father stood behind me, close enough that the tobacco on his breath reached me when he spoke. You're going to sign, he said softly now, like he was being patient with a child. Don't embarrass yourself. There it was again. Not a request. A correction. Nina sighed and turned her palm up, like I was forcing her to parent me. Dad, she said, voice sweet, she lives for conflict. She always has. My father nodded as if that settled it. Too emotional, he murmured, almost sadly, like he wished I'd been born different. You've always been fragile. Fragile. I could have laughed. I'd landed aircraft in crosswinds that made grown men sweat through their flight suits. I'd led crews through emergencies where everyone's eyes went to me, waiting for a decision. Fragile was a word my father used for women he couldn't steer. Grant chuckled. She's going to try to make this some moral crusade. Like, she's the hero. My father leaned closer, voice dropping to that intimate tone men use when they want to sound caring while tightening a vice. This isn't about feelings, Elena, he said. This is about responsibility. And you, he paused like he was searching for the cleanest insult. You've never been stable. My jaw tightened so hard it ached. I forced it loose. One controlled breath. In the cockpit, when things go wrong, you don't let your body vote. You don't let fear steer. You breathe, you slow your thinking down, you follow procedure. My father wanted a reaction. He wanted me to argue, so he could call it hysteria. He wanted me loud, so he could call it proof. Nina watched closely, her eyes bright with that old rivalry, hers built on approval, mine built on escape. She said, "You know what's sad? You could have had such a beautiful life if you'd just listened. If you'd stayed. If you'd learned how to be appropriate." Appropriate. In her mouth, it meant obedient. My father's Scotch glass tilted as he took another sip, and the smell rose again, smooth, expensive, like he was drinking his own authority. "Sign it," he said. "Then we can stop pretending." I picked up the pen again, just to keep them leaning forward. I pressed the clicker once. Click. Grant's eyes flicked to the pen like he couldn't help himself. Nina's mouth tightened, anticipating victory. My father's gaze locked onto my hand as if my fingers were the leash he needed back. I didn't sign. I waited. Because I don't fight a system by wrestling the controls. I analyze the system. My father's anger wasn't a threat. It was noise. And I was waiting for the clear frequency. In a cockpit, you don't argue with warning lights. You acknowledge them. You identify the failure. You isolate it. You handle it in order. That's all this was. A system. A failure. A family running a coercion checklist they'd used on me my whole life. I kept my voice level clean, controlled, the same tone I used when a junior officer tried to talk over me in a briefing. The tone that says, "I'm not asking for permission. I'm stating a fact." I looked at Mr. Halvorsen. Not at my father. Not at Nina. Not at Grant. Instruments. Not weather. "Mr. Halvorsen," I said, "does Section 4, Paragraph C of the Faithful Steward Clause apply to signatures obtained under duress in this jurisdiction?" My father froze mid-breath. Like his body tried to keep going and his mind slammed on the brakes. Nina's eyes widened. She'd spent her life thinking I was just the girl who ran away to play soldier. She didn't realize I had spent my nights studying the fine print of my own life. Grant stopped smiling. Mr. Halvorsen went still in a way that told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. His fingers tightened around his folder. His face drained a shade. He looked at me, really looked, and then his gaze slid to my father. "I'm afraid it does," he said carefully. My father's voice snapped, sharp with disbelief. "What is she talking about?" Mr. Halvorsen opened the trust documents. Pages turned with that dry whisper of paper, soft, but relentless. Each page flip felt like a stair step down into something my father couldn't charm his way out of. "The Faithful Steward Clause," he said, "was added at your father's request, Elena's grandfather, specifically to prevent coercion." Nina laughed once, thin and panicked. "Coercion? Nobody's coercing." Mr. Halvorsen raised a hand. "Please." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He turned another page. Then another. My father's Scotch glass trembled slightly in his hand. And the smell of the Scotch oak, smoke, pushed forward again, only now it didn't smell like wealth. It smelled like desperation. If any family member attempts to pressure the primary beneficiary into renouncing assets, Mr. Halvorsen continued, that family member is immediately disqualified from all benefits of the estate, including existing trust distributions. Nina's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Grant's face strained like someone pulled a plug. My father took a step forward, anger trying to cover fear. That's not enforceable." Mr. Halvorsen didn't blink. "It is enforceable," he said. "It was drafted for this scenario. Witnessed properly. Funded properly." My father's nostrils flared. I could see him running through his usual options: intimidate, charm, deny, threaten. But paperwork doesn't flinch. And Section 4, Paragraph C, Mr. Halvorsen added, explicitly addresses duress. Any signature obtained under coercion triggers disqualification automatically. The room went quiet enough that I could hear the fire crackle. Nina's phone slipped from her hand and hit the hardwood with a dull slap. Grant's lips moved like he was searching for a lie that would save him. My father stared at the renunciation paper like it had betrayed him. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time that night, his eyes showed something real. Not disgust. Not superiority. Fear. Because he finally understood the payoff to all those years of calling me unstable. The unstable daughter had done her homework. The emotional daughter had read the binder. The difficult daughter had stayed calm long enough to let the truth walk into the room on its own. I set the pen down gently. It tapped the mahogany. Click. That sound landed like a verdict. Grant started pacing first, hands in his hair like he was trying to physically pull an answer out of his skull. "This is insane," he muttered. "This can't be real. That's not how money works." Nina's voice went soft in a hurry, the way it always did when she needed something. "Elena," she said, "like we were close, this is a misunderstanding. We're family. Family." In her mouth, it sounded like a chain. My father didn't look at Nina. Didn't look at Grant. He stared at me like I'd committed a crime by being prepared. "You always do this," he said quietly. "You always make things bigger than they are." The old weapon again. When I was 15 and refused to wear the dress, I was dramatic. When I was 18 and chose the Air Force, I was rebellious. When I was 25 and didn't come home to be managed, I was unstable. Now, when I didn't sign away $9.8 million, I was overreacting. My father leaned toward the lawyer. "We were presenting options," he said, voice smoothing out like he was back in a boardroom. "Elena is misinterpreting the situation." Mr. Halvorson's eyes stayed hard. "The trust requires documentation of coercive attempts," he said. My father's face twitched. "What did you document?" Mr. Halvorson opened a notepad. "I documented the presentation of a renunciation document," he said. "I documented the instruction for Elena to sign. And I documented repeated assertions of instability and emotionality used to pressure compliance." Nina went pale. Grant stopped pacing. My father set his scotch down with a controlled thud, and the smell of it hung in the air, stronger now, sourer, like the room itself was sweating. He looked at me and said, "You think you're clever?" I didn't answer. Because the moment I argued, he'd call it proof. Instead, I stood up slowly. The chair scraped the floor. My father's voice followed me, quiet and poisonous. "You walk out that door and you're done in this family." I looked at him. And for the first time, I understood something with perfect clarity. He thought family meant obedience. He thought love was a contract you signed in blood and kept paying into, even when it drained you dry. I picked up my jacket. "Goodbye," I said. No drama. No pleading. No anger. Just a clean exit. And I walked out, leaving them with the consequences of their arrogance. A week later, I sat outside with coffee cooling in my hands, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The air smelled like damp earth and pine. Quiet. Honest. No tobacco. No scotch. No voices trying to label me so they could control me. I thought about my grandfather and what he really left me. Not just money. A boundary with teeth. A final act of protection from a man who knew exactly what my father would do the moment he smelled weakness. And I thought about Nina, too, how she'd spent her whole life chasing approval like it was oxygen. How she'd learned to survive by becoming what the family demanded. Her success wasn't earned independence. It was compliance dressed up as elegance. And in that study, when the lawyer read the clause aloud, I saw it in her eyes, the shock of realizing the difficult daughter had become the only one in the room who could not be controlled. Money doesn't change people. It unmasks them. It shows you who they are when the numbers get big enough to peel the manners off. My father didn't become cruel because of the inheritance. He revealed what was already there. Grant didn't become greedy. He simply stopped pretending. Nina didn't suddenly turn fake. She just let the mask slip. And me? I learned something I should have learned years earlier. Silence isn't weakness. It's discipline. Preparation is louder than insult. And boundaries aren't cruelty. They're self-worth, made visible. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to sign your name to someone else's version of you. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been the difficult daughter, the one they called unstable because you wouldn't shrink, I want to ask you something because I know I'm not the only one who's been at that table. I'd love to know, have you ever had to stand your ground when everyone expected you to fold? Or maybe you've dealt with a Grant or a Nina in your own life. Tell me your story in the comments. We read every single one.